Hey Deborah, thanks for being here. How are you?
Hi, Barbara. I'm really good, thank you.
Good. Today's all about you, and I'm really excited to kind of just dig into your journey because we've known each other for quite a while now, haven't we?
Yeah.
So there's probably loads that I don't know, which is it's exciting for me today. So where do you want to start?
Well, first of all, I just want to say it's really funny being the other side of the podcast. So if I start asking you questions, you'll just have to rein me in, won't you? So I've listened to a few of your episodes and I thought about this, and in some ways, I think I'm always very much influenced by Steve Covey. And he always says, start with the end in mind, doesn't he?
One of my favourite quotes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a really lovely place to start. And I have a sort of practical time place to start of where I got on this journey. But for me, the end in mind is really my purpose. And I know we share a philosophy that, we're only tapping into our potential. And for me to be able to help people unlock that through their impact and the tools I use around personal branding, and I'm sure we'll unpack at that as we talk, because I think my take is a little bit different than often what people think of personal branding, are really what got me on this path. And I can't see me ever stopping. I talk to other people that talk about selling their businesses and retirement, but I really do feel I've found my purpose. And whether I'll always do it formally, for me, I can spot, I think my gift is that I can spot something in people and connect with them. And if I can just help somebody step up and see that potential, then that makes me incredibly happy. So that would be my starting point for you.
Amazing. You know what? I love all of that because we've had loads of conversations around this because we absolutely do share very similar purposes in terms of unlocking people's potential. And I completely agree with you. When you found that thing, which is your purpose, and I've got mixed views about this because sometimes you can spend a lifetime looking for your purpose. I often think the purpose is what you're doing right now. But in terms of our case, we've been doing this for a long time, and I'm just like you, I don't ever want to be doing anything else. This is it. Even if I wasn't being paid to do it, I'd still be the person sat next to you on a train or a plane or in a restaurant still doing my thing. So I love that. So we're going to have a really good conversation today, Deborah. So
something that you just said there though, Barbara, and I think this is a bit of something that people can fall into in personal development, is just because you found your purpose, it doesn't mean there aren't days where it's tough and there are bad days. And I think there's this misconception sometimes that, oh, well, you found your purpose, that everything's going to be, unicorns and rainbows. And actually, sometimes finding your purpose means that you have to dig really deep. And yes, in the moment, most of the time it's really good. And I'm a big believer in being mindful and being in the moment. But I think it is dynamic, if you like, your purpose, and it grows with you.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm not the same person, and probably neither are you from when I started. And thank God for that, right? We want evolution. We want to learn and grow. And it reminds me of that Maya Angelou quote that says, we do what we can with what we've got, and when we know better, we do better, right? And that's the whole thing. We just keep doing as better as we learn and grow. But you're right, just because we know what we want to do doesn't mean to say it's easy. Because I can't even count the days where it's been hard and you think, what am I doing this for? But you're doing it because there is nothing else to do.
And easy can be a bit boring. I mean, I don't buy into hustle culture and all that. There have been times when I have, and I think that's where I've evolved. I'm a bit kinder to myself these days. But I like a challenge. So you just keep up in the bar. For me, that's a growth mindset.
I completely agree. it's about making it more exciting for yourself. You know, so as you've just said, you do up the bar, you get a bigger goal, you get a more, you know, you stretch a little bit further, and that's where the excitement comes in, isn't it?
Oh, definitely.
Love it. So where did it start for you?
So I trained as a lawyer because I went to an all-girls school, and that's what you did. You know, you went to a proper career. So I trained as a lawyer. I don't think my heart was ever really in it, but I knew it was a good degree to have. And so I went off, did my degree, and then went traveling. And I can remember my mum ringing me and saying, and of course it was all long distance calls then, and I saying, Deborah, there's this place at law school, are you going to take it or not? And I said, well, I don't know what else I'm going to do, Mum. So yes, I'll take it. So it was never this burning ambition to be a lawyer. And which makes me smile, actually, because my son is currently watching Suits and has got this drive to become a lawyer. And we keep saying to him, it's not all like Suits, and they don't all look like Meghan Markle, Oscar, but you know, but I didn't have that drive. It was just a good career. And I trained, and then I found a love. I went working with a management, after I'd qualified, I worked with the management consultants. And while I was there, it opened up my eyes. I just happened to pick up a copy of Marketing Week one day, and I discovered a love of communications. And I was lucky because I was in a very commercial consultancy that gave me lots of options to see how people worked. And that introduced me to different disciplines, I suppose. So from there, I went to Old Trafford Cricket Ground as their marketing and comms officer, and I've got a lifelong love of sport. I was brought up by a dad who played cricket and loved football. He told the nurses in the nursing home that I was going to play for Manchester United until he realised I was a girl, and I was at my first cricket match at 3 weeks old. So I've been immersed in that. So for me to get this job at Old Trafford in marketing as well was just a dream job for me. And I was there for over 10 years. And I actually ended up as I was appointed as the first media manager in the professional sport. And it was a really big thing at the time that I was female for a start. It was very male dominated. I think the only other female managers were in the hospitality arm, and that it really did come up with some real challenges for me. But what an experience! And I worked with people like Freddie Flintoff and you know, Shane Warne, and you know, some of the real greats. And it was a real privileged time. We worked hard, but we played hard, and I was young enough then to enjoy it. But at that time, and I suppose the reason I talk about this is my job there as media manager was to recognise the right players to put forward for the sponsors, or for, if it was a test match, the press conferences afterwards. And really that was personal brand in the very early days. And the skills I learned then, I still use today, because if I'm working maybe with a senior exec, as part of their personal brand, media skills are important, then I use the media training that I worked on then. And then from there, a few different roles, went to CIS, the insurance company, learned a lot about impact there and how to work with people, because very male, again, a very male dominated industry. And my role was to take the chaps, because it was all male, the people on their events, the sponsorship and their events from that they would have won a prize. So it might be to take them to the Milan Grand Prix or wherever, and to have to manage a coach full of maybe 50 blokes that have been at the Grand Prix all day on hospitality certainly meant I had to dig deep. I had to learn impact and influence in some quite tricky circumstances at times. But again, I suppose a little bit like we were talking about before, I found my own way of doing that. And, you know, I'll often say to people, don't be put off by the soft exterior. And I learned very early on that I didn't have to be, pardon the phrase, this ballsy woman. I could show up as myself, but as long as I had that self-belief, then people, and I communicated that and I was able to articulate that, then people would respond in the majority of cases in the right way. So that was a steep learning curve. And then sort of jumping forward a couple of roles, I worked for a local organisation that some of your listeners might know if they are in our local area, called Crag Rats. It was a super training organisation. And I don't know if, do you remember Why Don't You? Are you old enough to remember Why Don't You? I always felt that working at Crag Rats was like, why don't you? We worked hard, but my goodness, we played hard as well. And unfortunately, the business went bump and we all went off. We were all made redundant. And I think it's a real legacy of the place that most of us went off and set up our own businesses. And from there, I think everybody thought I would set up a comms agency, but I always knew that my strength and the feedback I'd always had was that it was the way I show up. And I was never the prettiest, I was never the cleverest, I was never the funniest, I was never the fastest, I was the last one to be picked at rounders. But I always knew if I put that effort in and I showed up and went the extra mile, gave the extra, 1%, that I was onto something. And when I set the business up 12 years ago, nobody talked about personal branding. Yeah. I talked about impact in those days, but I realized I had something that I could package up using the skills that I'd had that could really make a difference to women and men, particularly in those times in your life when you have a huge change. And at that time, I was suffering with what was finally diagnosed as depression, but I just lost my identity becoming a mum. And I don't know if this is something that you relate to, but Oscar would have been about 2 then. And I'd been used to these really high profile roles. And all of a sudden I was Oscar's mummy. I wasn't even known as Deborah. And, I would be sat on a church hall floor singing Dingly Dangly Scarecrow thinking, what the hell has happened to my life?
Yeah.
So, and my goodness me, he was a very much wanted child and we went on a hell of a journey to have him. So, it was everything that I always wanted. But in some ways they said that's part of the problem because you're intelligent and you think that everything's going to be wonderful. And all of a sudden your identity is completely changed. So that identity and impact all sort of fitted together for me. And so I trained as a coach and sort of started to walk the talk and set up then. And my entry point was actually through style and clothing and image consultancy alongside the NLP coaching, because fashion and style has always been a real love of mine, but it's also been something that I've used as a tool to stand out and for people to recognize me through the way I show up. And therefore that was the entry point. And even though I've moved away from that a lot, it's still very much part of my identity.
Amazing. There is so much there that I kind of want to dive into.
I've talked a lot.
No, are you kidding? That's perfect. There's so much that I want to dive into. I can completely relate to what you said about losing your identity after being a mum. I remember that vividly. You're right. You all of a sudden, one day you're Barbara, you're Deborah, and then the next you're somebody's mum, and it's a shift. Yeah. But I want to kind of go back a little bit further back in your story, because you said something that made my ears just prick up a little bit. You said that you realized that you didn't have to be a ballsy woman, and that you could actually show up as yourself. And this is something that so many people struggle with. I mean, in your world, I certainly know from my clients as well, there's a lot of talk on social media and just in general about authenticity and being yourself. But that's hard. That's really hard, especially when we often wear so many different hats, and we go to work and we might be a corporate professional person, and we go home and we might be somebody else. And it can be really difficult to, one, decide who you are, and I actually just drill into that, who's the real you, and then have the courage and bravery to show up as yourself. So if that's it, let's just dive into that a bit, because I know you've been through that journey. How did you do that? How did you just decide who you were and then just show up as yourself, your true authentic self?
I think that's still a journey I'm on, and I if I'm honest, and I think with age, again, it's that nothing stands still, does it? If it stands still, something's going wrong. So nothing stands still, and we're evolving. And you know, I'm 54, so that brings these challenges. So I'm coping with that. And showing up as a 54-year-old is very different from showing up as a 30-year-old as I would have been then. And there are very different challenges, but there are still the challenges. And therefore, I do think it's being able to, I think people struggle with authenticity because, as ever, and I'm guilty of this, and I was with a client yesterday, I'm very much the good girl. And part of my counselling around identity was around perfectionism. So, you know, I set myself these standards and I want to do the right thing. And I think sometimes around authenticity, there's a challenge around wanting to do it right. But that's the whole thing, isn't it? If you're wanting to do it in a certain way, then actually you're working against something. So, but I also, and maybe this is a little bit counterintuitive as well, I'm a big believer in that we can create who we want to be. And therefore, I think people talk about being authentic and it's being your core self and your true self. But I don't think there is anything wrong. And I encourage all my clients to do this, to say, well, this is where I am now, but actually this is where I'd like to be. And I'm not saying we're faking it till we're making it. Absolutely not. But what I am saying is we are looking within us and saying, where are my strengths? What can I use? What transferable skills have I got? What can I develop about myself to bring myself to that point that I'm in growing my self-image so that I become this new person. So, yeah, it's a bit like an iPhone, isn't it? We don't go out and buy a new iPhone every time we need a software upgrade. And for me, it's that sort of software upgrade rather than changing the hardware. It's just developing and evolving.
Yeah, I love everything that you've just said, because it's so true. And I do the same with my clients as well. And it's a really interesting exercise to do for yourself, because it's about the way that I look at it, Deborah, and it's recognizing that you're a work in progress, that where you are right now isn't the finished article. I don't want this, place where I am to be the finished article, because there's so much that I'd like to improve. So I think you're right. If you look ahead and think, yeah, I'd like to, do this, be this person, or to have this habit, or to, understand more about myself in this way. And so you're always working forward. It's a development opportunity for you to just keep growing.
Yeah, but I think it's very important just to say here that it's not about fixing anything.
No, it's about tapping into your strengths, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's that fine line. This isn't coming from a place of I'm not good enough.
No.
This is coming from a place of I am good enough, and therefore I'd like to develop, I'd like to grow. And it's such a subtle thing, and just understanding why people, so it's not that I don't think this version, Deborah 2.0, isn't good enough. It's actually, what can we, as we would do with software,
how can we just improve? What can we, how can we smooth off the edges a little bit? And again, something else that you said was brilliant about, it's not about being perfect. You don't have to look in and try and find your authentic self as though you're trying to find, I don't know, a piece of gold. You're not looking for that nugget.
Where is it?
Yeah, where is it? Well, it's here somewhere. I know I'm it's, where is my true self? I mean, I haven't found it yet. Have you?
Exactly. When you do, let me know.
Yeah, it's probably behind the sofa. Everything's behind the sofa. I'll go and look after this. But it's not about doing it right. It's just about understanding who you are in this moment. That said, there is this kind of element of being able to just discard some things that you don't want, or that don't fit you anymore, or just to maybe show up as maybe a less corporate version of yourself. And I'm saying this because when I left corporate back in 2010, and I'd had 13 years of being in, in a corporate position, and it took me ages to just allow myself to not have that corporate speak. And sometimes I still do it, but just to not have that corporate speak, to not write in that way, to just be a bit more Barbara. And that's a difficult thing to do.
Yeah. This is something that I talk a lot, and I'll probably get on my little hobby horse about this one, but I trained as a lawyer, and a number of my clients these days are professional services. It wasn't the intention, but that is just because I have an understanding of that profession. And one of the most challenging things for me, and I see it in clients on a daily basis, is that at some point somebody tells young professionals that they need to be professional.
Yeah.
And for some reason, people believe, or not everybody, but a lot of people believe that that means they have to leave their personality at home.
True.
And that they can show no vulnerability. Now, vulnerability is another topic in itself, because I think it's understanding what vulnerability really is. But being able to show personality and being able to share a bit of yourself without oversharing. People ask me about this on social media. Well, I don't want to share my personal life. I share some of my personal life, but actually you don't know a lot about me if you look at because my boundaries are very clear on what I do share. And therefore, I think this being professional is a real challenge for a number of people. And that's that corporate. So I'll meet somebody and we have a wonderful meeting, and it's all warm, and, fun and laughter are very much part of my personal brand. So we have a great meeting and we connect and we have a hug as we leave. And I get an email from them, and I think, where's this email come from?
Yeah.
Because it's Dear Deborah, and not quite further to our meeting, but we go into this corporate speaking email. And I do think that if we could just relax that a little bit and not be frightened of sharing and being ourselves. Having said that, and I have a little voice in my head, as we all do, and mine's called Horace. Horace has just kicked in there. And I suppose one of my Horace moments, or one of my imposter syndrome moments, is, well, I worry that I sound corporate enough, and is that impressive enough? But I do believe that if people buy into us, then, our right people will connect, and that's what they want.
Absolutely. I think, where people buy people at the end of the day. And as you were talking, I love that your inner critic is called Horace. Mine's Marjorie.
Marjorie and Horace could have a field day, couldn't they?
Couldn't they? Yeah, wouldn't want them in the room together. It's just not good. But I remember years ago being in a meeting with this person who was they weren't their best self in that meeting, let's just put it that way. And somebody at the end of the meeting, somebody said, it's strange because you'd love her outside of work, she's amazing. And I in that moment, I remember, and I was only quite young at the time, I remember thinking, I don't want to be around Jekyll and Hyde people. I want to know the person that they really are, and not this person, because there was really no need for that behavior. And this is the thing, it's about, one, I completely believe that people buy people, that we're all really just energetic beings. We're attracted by, somebody that we enjoy being around and that has the same values as us. But at the same token, it's about allowing ourselves to open up and be that person, knowing that there's no real consequences to it. So that's the challenge, isn't it?
And actually, that's where the magic happens as well. And I had, so again, for those of a certain age, I was introduced to a lawyer a few months ago now, and I was actually sat in a Starbucks. I had to take the Zoom call in a Starbucks, and we were chatting, and she said, I'm really sorry, Deborah, I wasn't sure of the times. I think it's my perimenopause and my menopause brain. I said, oh, I know that. And all of a sudden we ended up with a half-hour conversation. She ended up recommending this brilliant pharmacy that's local to us, that's a private pharmacy that specializes in menopause, which I've since gone and worked with and had treatment through. And this whole conversation was actually life-changing for me because of the treatment that I was able to get. And that was all because of that moment of vulnerability. And I didn't think, oh, this isn't very professional, I'm going to move. And I said, gosh, I feel exactly the same. Yes. And we talked as two women, as two businesswomen, very credible businesswomen, that it didn't make us any less credible or any less good at our jobs because we had this discussion. And I think permission to be ourselves is something that we all need to recognize. And I know we had this conversation a couple of weeks ago. I'm going through a tricky time in my personal life with my dad not being well. And one of the best pieces of advice somebody gave to me was, Deborah, there isn't a right way to do this. And that goes back to that perfectionism. It's that permission to show up as we need to show up on that day, in that moment, whatever the situation is. Totally.
I completely agree with you, because we're attracted to people like that, because we're all of a sudden talking to humans. And again, I'm a firm believer that behavior breeds behavior, and however you decide to show up, I'm then going to try and calibrate myself to that. And it might feel clunky and uncomfortable, but if you're your genuine, brilliant self and just show up as you, you're automatically then giving me permission to do that, or vice versa. So I think it's a real gift. But I love that story of just two amazing people, two humans having just an honest conversation.
Yeah.
It also reminds me, again, years ago, when it was before Zoom, and we were just on the phone, and I was talking to this lady, and she's all of a sudden just stopped talking. She was a bit quiet, and I says, what's just happened? What's going on? And she went, I'm just going to be completely honest, my baby's just woken up, it's in the next room. And I said, go sort your baby out. And she says, oh, thank God, just thank God. And we got talking later, and she said, I was scared to say that I'm also looking after my baby, and I'm also just a mum right now, because she felt that it was a weakness. This is mum, you're a mum first, go sort your baby out. And again, in that moment, we had that connection of just two people, two humans, talking about the things that we're going through. And that's so powerful.
Oh, and that is the authentic. And and you've just reminded me of something there. And I mean, it's crazy really when you think about the fact that I set up the business to be, the whole identity piece came around becoming a mum. But then I set off, and maybe this is that corporate hang up a little bit. And by the way, one of the first things I did was get rid of all the corporate suits, because that was part of the old identity. But it didn't mean that I had to lose who I became. So, I might have my silver trainers when I was up at the park rather than, my scratchy jogging bottoms and great. And so I found ways to make that work for me. But the irony was that what I started to do was say, oh, well, I'm really, if somebody said, could you have a meeting at 9 o'clock? I would say, oh, no, I've already got a meeting at that time. And you know what's coming, don't you? And could you have a meeting at 3 o'clock? Oh, no, I've got my diaries full at that time. Who was I kidding? I was going on the school run. I was going to nursery. My, little boy needed me. And why wouldn't I do that? And it took me a long time to, again, finding that authentic self. Why wouldn't I allow myself just to say, I'm a mum first? That is absolutely part of my identity.
Yeah. And it's that fear of, what will other people think? Well, what will they think any less of me? Does it mean that I'm not as good as, filling your own gaps? And I started my business for the sole reason of being able to do the school run. And because I'd had older children and I'd worked non-stop in a corporate career, I've never done the school run. I can count on one hand how many times I did the school run. And when Rosie came along, then that was it. I was quitting work. I was going to just go on the school run. So, but for me, the shift happened, and you've just reminded me actually, was I didn't want to start work before 10 o'clock. I wanted that time for myself in the morning. So I don't have any calls before 10. And it took me ages to just give myself permission to say, no, I'm not starting work before 10. Yeah, if you want me, it's 10 o'clock and that's it. But before 10, it's not on the cards. And it is that reason, that underlying fear of I'm not good enough, or I'm you're gonna think less of me because of that. So how do we get over that? What are your thoughts? What's worked for you?
Well, it's all the shoulds, isn't it? I need to, and I should. And we do a lot of shoulding. And it's really funny you say that about the time, because last September, I'd had an office for 4 years or so. And then during lockdown, I gave up my office. And then last September, I just realised that I'd lost my mojo a little bit. And I think so many of us, this sort of languishing, I think was the word, wasn't it, that was coined. But I just felt I'd stopped thriving and I was surviving a bit. And for me, I needed to get back out there and go to work in my mind. And therefore, I came back to the office, and I realised at that point that I like my time. Once, you know, we've done this, we don't do the school run, unfortunately, anymore. Those days are gone. But you know what? We have our little quirky. I stand at the bedroom window and still wave him off. He doesn't even turn back and wave these days. But if he ever did,
I know you're there. I'm with you, Deborah. We do the same.
The Sainsbury's delivery man looks at me sometimes and says, "He's not looking back." Oh, I know, but I'm here.
But I'm here.
And that is, you know, going back to that authenticity and identity. Absolutely, that is part of who I am. And if anything had to be given up, it would be the business and everything else, because he comes first. That is me, and not everybody agrees with that, but that is the way I do things. That's me. So I think it is knowing your values, and you know, I know you'll have talked about this on here before, but really knowing what your values are and what really matters to you, and then living by those. And that's two very different things. You know, you can sit there with a piece of paper, or I've got a box of values here that, you know, I get people working through. You can pick them out and have them on the wall, but you've got to live by them. And I know that I am at my happiest when I am happy, when I am balanced, when I am kind to myself, and family is a priority, and I need that balance. And I'm one of those people, you know, I sometimes question my resilience, because I can fall over very quickly. But I've learned actually that if I look after myself and I have that self-care, and so for me, it's going for a walk in the morning, going for a run, it's having a nice shower, getting dressed, all that time for me, meditate, bit of journaling, so that sometimes I don't get in, you know, this is my first call of the day at 10 o'clock. And why was I waiting for permission for that? So it is, I think, what hints and tips would I say? It's about knowing what matters, and it's about recognizing what your strengths are and when you perform at your best. And for me, I show up far better. It's quality, isn't it, rather than quantity? I show up far better. You get a much more pleasant version of Deborah if I've been allowed to go through that routine in a morning. Exactly
that. It's just understanding how you perform at your best. And that's a non-negotiable, because you care. I often say to my clients, because you care about your team, your business, your family, the people around you, that's the permission you need to look after yourself, to put yourself first. And I talk about leading yourself first, not in a selfish way, but in a necessity way. It's essential. It's a non-negotiable, because just like you, I know when I've had that time in the morning, I'm not a great morning person anyway, but when I've had that time to wave Rosie off at school now, it's not just like you, it's not a drop off anymore, to have a cup of tea, to walk the dog, or go for a run, or just meditate, do all the bits and pieces that you've already mentioned. Now I'm all yours. I can literally bring my full self to the table and you'll get everything that you need. So, and that's the thing. If I didn't have that time, if I felt rushed, if I felt pressured, all you're getting is resentment, you know?
Yeah.
And it's
You're
not your
chasing the
fault.
day, aren't you?
Exactly, but it's not your fault. You've not pushed me into it. I mean, metaphorically, you know, it's not the other person's fault. It's my fault for not giving myself permission to do that. But yet you bring resentment, you bring just frustration. You might be, you know, just on the back foot, like you said, chasing the day. And that's not how you want to run your life.
You know, I think this comes down to one thing, and this is about boundaries. And it's your own personal boundaries.
Exactly.
And it's about the non-negotiables. And another one sort of that, again, I think we've talked about this before. And when I mean, I do a lot of public speaking and a lot of, because I'm so niche in what I do, I'm often traveling, I'm often down in London. And I know if I've had a day where I've delivered a workshop or I've done a keynote, then I am absolutely exhausted because I give it my all. And I think a lot of people would think I'm quite extrovert, but actually I've learned, that's learned behavior. The introversion is I need my energy, I need my quiet time, you know, I need to be up on top of a hill going for a walk just to recharge. And again, it's about, you know, it's about taking the time to be still and know what you need. And I often think about the analogy of a jar of water with silt in it or sand in it. If you shake it up and down, it's never going to be clear. You just need to give it time to settle. And for me, it's in those times of reflection that I realize what it is that I need. And therefore, I give myself that permission, and then I put the boundaries up. And there's I'm going to give you half a story, which doesn't help, but Brené Brown talks about boundaries. And she gives a story about when she was speaking at an event and she didn't want to appear precious. So she didn't say, well, I don't like speaking after a certain time. And could I have a quiet room? And could I have the green room so that I can go and recharge before I speak? And there were these things that allowed her to perform at her best. And she said, none of those were met because I didn't ask for them. And she said, afterwards, I sat at that dinner and I was so resentful that these people had taken advantage of me, hadn't treated me as well as I expected. And she said, and I learned from that then. So she said, now part of my rider, if you like, is that I stop over, I have a hotel room, I have a green room so I can go and be quiet. I don't necessarily, and she has those stipulations that allow her to perform to her best. And that was quite an eye-opener for me, that it's actually self-care.
It really is.
It's not selfish, it's self-care.
And it's the greatest gift that you can give to yourself and your work. If you think that your work is your life's work and you want to give your best to it because you've got pride, then why wouldn't you care for yourself so that you the best self is showing up? I've heard that story about Brené Brown in terms of not asking. And I had this conversation actually not long ago with one of my clients about just setting boundaries. It's one of the very first things that we do, just establishing your boundaries, because if we don't actually take the time to think about what they are, we're always on a losing battle, aren't we? It's always just we're in the slipstream. So it's about just sitting down and thinking, what is our ideal day? If everything was the same, if you've not won the lottery, your business was the same, your house was the same, your family, everything was the same, what would your ideal day look like? And maybe it's just shaving off half an hour in the morning so you can do all these quality things. Maybe it's finishing earlier. I read an article quite a while ago actually about this this CEO, and she really struggled with managing the evening meals with her children, and she couldn't get back from work in time to have dinner with her family, and it was a real bone of contention. Everybody was really annoyed about it, and it was a massive pressure for her every day. And then one day she realized that she was trying to conform to everybody else's ideas of what a family should do, and she flipped it on its head, and she said, right, we don't have evening meals together, we're having breakfast together. So every morning we're going to have a bit longer before school, we're going to have a proper breakfast, we're going to sit around the table, have our chats then. And immediately everything shifted, because she wasn't in a rush at the end of the day. Nobody expected her to be there at the end of the day because they had that time. And it's again giving yourself permission to let go of some of the stuff that you've been trying to mold yourself into, and saying, this isn't working for me, but this would, I'm willing to experiment with something different and see how it fits.
Yeah, I love that actually. And isn't that a great analogy for so many different, just being curious on how could I make this work? How can I be creative and make this work for me? And I think we can get very stuck. And again, this comes back to my perfectionism and wanting to conform and, being the good girl and doing what I should and what's expected. And rather than actually, this is how I want to run my business. Why do we run our own businesses?
What's the point?
And then we fall into, oh, well, they're working these hours, so perhaps I should be. And it's crazy the amount of pressure we put ourselves on. I think the other important thing with boundaries, though, just touching that, and I actually had this conversation with a client yesterday, is that we need to articulate those boundaries.
Yes.
Because so often those boundaries are in our head, but nobody else knows about them. And all of a sudden we think everybody's telepathic, don't we? So, being able to articulate those boundaries, and often those are the most difficult conversations. But
what I love when you do start communicating your boundaries is the ripple effect, because all of a sudden you're giving other people permission to communicate and create their boundaries too. And that's just a magical moment, isn't it? Where somebody's realizes that there is another way, that they can actually work a different way, and it worked for everybody.
And it's about respect. It's about self-respect.
It really is.
And it starts with ourselves. And this goes back to you saying about behaviors before. It starts with us. So if I show up in a way, then other people will show up in the way, whether that's clients, whether that's team, whether that's colleagues, whether that's family.
Yes.
We are constantly showing people how we show up, which going back to the personal branding, I think sort of taking it off tack, but it's still relevant here, is that is so much part of our personal brand. And I talk about being it rather than doing it. How are you showing up? Who are you today? And there's so much talk around a social media footprint when it comes to personal branding, but actually your personal brand is all the items that we've talked about. And Stephen Bartlett, because I think there's two separate camps on this, and I think there's sort of the younger generation coming through and the Gen Z that have grown up with social media and know nothing different. But I heard Stephen Bartlett talking the other day, and love him or loathe him, I think he really has been a great advocate for personal branding and how it's benefited him. And he was saying that it's so much more. I mean, he's made his fortune in social media, hasn't he? But it's so much more than that social media footprint. It's the small things. It's, smiling, it's making eye contact, it's shaking hands, it's remembering somebody's name, it's, whatever it is, it's taking that moment to listen.
Being consistent all the way through. So if I know, well, I know this anyway because we're friends, but if I met you in the supermarket, you'd still be you. And if I met you in the playground or the school run or wherever, you'd still be you. If I met you in a meeting where we're doing business together, you'd still be you. And it's that consistency. It's not,
Absolutely.
Oh, Deborah's great in outside of work, but geez, you don't want to be next to her in a meeting. We don't have any of that, you know. It's you're consistent.
And even to the point that one of the most consistent feedback I get when I present, whether it's in front of 500, 200, is you are so authentic. What you see is what you get. And I stand up there because I can't stand and talk about brand and authenticity if I'm going to get up there and put on a performance. And don't get me wrong, they get a dialed up version.
Yes.
So
but it's on the same scale, isn't it? So
absolutely.
You're not going and working on somebody else's scale. You've just dialed it up a little bit, and that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. So I think there is it's those, and going back to wonderful Brené again, she talks about trust, and actually brand is all about, that's all it is. It's about trust. And there was a Gallup survey. I mentioned it on my podcast, funnily enough, yesterday. There was a Gallup survey last summer that said trust in business brands is at its lowest that it has ever been. And that's where, if you've got your business brand, you've got your personal brand running alongside it. And the analogy I used is you've got your business brand, which is like the motorway, the highway, and that's where we want to get everybody. But your personal brand's a bit like the slip road. That's the entry point for people to get to know you and bring you onto that highway. And I do think that that's because it's easier to talk about all the things, to communicate all the things that we've talked about. So our values, our personality, which allow us to build the trust. And going back to Brené, she talks about trust is built in the small moments.
Oh, so that's a whole other topic. We could talk about that for hours. You're absolutely right. It is so true. It's those teeny tiny moments in time that actually mean a lot.
And get broken as well.
And get broken. Yeah. I used to run a workshop, and I've run it for hundreds and hundreds of people. And I used to ask people, tell me about your best boss, tell me about your worst. And honestly, Deborah, the things that people would say about their worst bosses, I won't even go into now. But the best bosses were the ones that just were consistent in the tiniest of deep moments. Like, they always said thank you. They said morning. They remembered my kids' names. They always sat next to me every day and said, how was your weekend? It was those teeny tiny insignificant moments in time that all added up. They always made me a cup of tea when I came in, or they took their turn in the tea run. It was the tiny human moments. And exactly. That just matters. And every single one of them said, I would go to work for that person in a heartbeat for nothing. If they phoned me at 2 o'clock in the morning, I would be there. And the bad bosses were always, obviously the opposite was true. They might be occasion where they've done something, horrendous. Yeah. But on most of the time it was, they just didn't have time for me. I was just a number to them. And those moments just really, really matter.
Oh, and you just brought to mind, I mean, we've talked about being mums, but I can remember Oscar going to secondary school, and my secondary school was an all girls, small private school, so it was a very different world than he was going into. And it's a fabulous school, but it's a big local school. And he had been at a small primary school, and he's a redhead, and he was well known, and his personality. And I was worried that he would just get lost when he got to high school. And our first parents sort of evening, it wasn't a full parents evening, but a check-in. And I can remember saying to one of the members of staff very early on, how's he going on? And he was head of year, this chap. And he said, and I said, I'm Oscar's mum, he's the redhead. And he said, oh, I know who Oscar is. And this would be the October, as he started in the September. And he started to talk about him. And I thought, he does know Oscar. He knows my son. He knows his little foibles. He knows my boy. And from that day onwards, that head of year, and he still is head of year, and I'll be devastated when he leaves in a couple of weeks. And apparently, and just on that, I am going off on a tangent, apparently he'd done an assembly with them last week and he cried. Oh. And I just thought, what a fabulous role model for young men and women, but for young men to see that emotion and that trust and that connection that had gone through with them, and that he wasn't frightened of showing that. But that was built in that very moment, and whatever he had asked us to do as parents, we would have done it for him, because he had our son at the forefront.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. So we've covered a lot of ground, Deborah. I've just looked up at the time. Can you believe an hour's just gone?
No.
So
let's do it again. I've loved this.
We'll just pick another topic out of a hat and we'll do it again. So let's just have a bit of a roundup in terms of, because we have covered quite a lot today, in terms of takeaways that somebody can take away and think, right, okay, I want to work on my authenticity. I want to work on my personal brand. I want to start showing up as myself, give myself permission to create these boundaries. What would you say was, I know it's 3 completely separate topics. What would you say were the 3 things that if nothing else, somebody could just go and experiment with and just try out for themselves? What do you reckon?
Well, I would say take some time.
Nice.
And I would take some time out of your normal environment. And I don't mean, booking a hotel or anything, or a retreat, although that's always fabulous as well. But take some time for you. And then I would look at 3 things. And this is what I use as my impact method, whether I'm coaching, whether I'm delivering a workshop, is having clarity. So really think about clarity of your values. What do you want? Start with the end in mind. What do you want to be known for? Who do you want to show up as? So that's that, looking at your values, who you are, what message you want to share, and then learn to communicate that. So communicate that with confidence, with impact. And that's through your body language, that's what I call more the reactive communication. And then the third one I talk about is capitalize, which is really your exposure. So get yourself out there, get visible. And this is an area that I hear many people, particularly women, but not just women, suffer with the visibility piece because we are uncomfortable sharing. But for me, when it came to permission, the piece that helped me was think of yourself as in service. And I know that you like Star Wars as well, but I read a great piece about be the guide, be Yoda, be the guide, serve, rather than being the hero, the Luke Skywalker. And therefore that gives you permission to show up and share your knowledge from your perspective, because nobody else has that unique perspective on the world. So you have got something to share. So that would be my 3 things: have clarity, communicate, and then build on that and be visible, not be frightened of being visible. And being visible is showing up as you.
Amazing. Love all of that. Deborah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Where can people find you?
DeborahOgden.com. And then I am on Instagram at DO Impact. And as you've been a guest on my On Brand With podcast, which was with guests. And I also have a weekly Monday podcast, which is More Impact, which is just a 20-minute sharing thoughts around personal brand and impact in my week. So I'd love people to tune in.
Amazing. We'll put all the links in the show notes, but thank you so much. I could talk to you all day. Thanks so much, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Barbara.